My name's Charlie Holt. I'm the author of the Christian Life Trilogy, and that's a small group curriculum that's designed for churches to walk through the Christian life, the crucified life, the resurrected life, and the spirit-filled life. I hope you'll stay on the webinar for the duration, and I'd love to have a chance to give a little commercial for that before we end. But I'm also a pastor of a church at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Lake Mary, Florida, and happy to be hosting this webinar and excited about the opportunity to talk about connecting congregation members into various groups and some of the methodologies that churches use to do that. And so on the call, I've invited Alan White, who is a worldwide expert on small group ministry. He has his own consulting company that is all about coaching churches and how to do small groups effectively, and he's been doing that for a long time. You want to introduce yourself, Alan, and then
Sure,
I'll introduce Teresa.
Be glad to. Welcome, everybody. Most of what Charlie just said about me is true. I've been on staff at 2 different churches, one in Northern California where I served for 15 years, and then one here in Greenville, South Carolina, where I served for 4 years. And then the balance of my 25 years of ministry with some overlap, I've been working with churches across the country in various capacities, helping them to grow their small groups, develop curriculum, and all of that fun stuff. And I haven't told you this yet, Charlie. Last Friday, I found out that there is a publisher that wants to pursue my book project, and so that'll be a new thing we can add to my list of laudable accomplishments. So.
Well, congratulations, Alan.
Thank you.
That would be really excellent and well deserved. We need to get your know-how out there to the churches because it's really great stuff. And I've been putting into practice the principles that Alan White teaches for about 10 years of our ministry ever since we did the 40 Days of Purpose campaign that Rick Warren put out. That's where I first met Alan and got coaching on how to do small group ministry. I also want to introduce Teresa Summerlin. Teresa Summerlin's on the call. She works with me with the Christian Life Trilogy and church relations, but I thought Teresa would be great for this particular webinar because she has been doing small groups as a host of a small group and a small group leader for many, many years, and actually I think has, like 3 small groups going right now?
I do right now, 3 small groups. Not necessarily recommended, but it's been very rewarding. So.
Yeah. So Teresa is a bit of an expert on what does it feel like to have new members come in and the process of bringing people into your group and the challenges and the good things, and so she's got a lot of great expert advice. So why don't we get moving with our presentation, and I think, Alan, you're in charge of advancing the slides, right? So the first question is, what is the best way to get members of our church assimilated into small groups? And one of the things that is a principle that we've been teaching on the webinars and encouraging churches to shoot for is it's quite possible to get 100% of your average Sunday attendance in small groups. But you have to be intentional about how you connect those people into those groups. And so here's a list of different ways to do that. You want to take this list, Alan, and maybe give a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Just a variety of ways. The main thing here is to see that there's more than one way to connect people into groups. And in some cases, you may need to use one or more of these in order to get as many as Charlie just said, to have 100% of your weekend attendance in groups. So some people will assign groups with using a sign-up card. Everybody would fill out a card, and then in the office administratively, you would assign them according to their zip code or their preferred night of the week, or preferred language, or if they have pets, or if they have children, or all those kinds of criteria, which is a lot of work. Maybe finding a group on a website, maybe a next step area or an information desk at the church that could direct them toward a group, a connection event or a small group fair where all of the groups would be represented and people could sign up in the groups. Personal invitation works really, really great. Unless you don't know anybody and you don't get invited, then that kind of stinks. And then also a host rally, and we'll talk about all of these a little more in detail. I think Charlie has muted himself.
Let's take them one by one. One of the first ways that is a way of signing people into small groups is through using a sign-up card. And the way we've done this practically in our own congregation is to actually put a host or a small group participant sign-up card in the bulletin that gets handed out to the people as they're coming into the church sanctuary. And then during the sermon or during an announcement time, I will draw attention to that sign-up card and say, hey, we're about to start a new small round of small groups, and we're going to be studying this particular curriculum, and we'd love to have you be a part of that. We have a lot of different hosts that have signed up to host small groups, and they're looking for people to be a part of their small group. So if you're interested, just put your name on the card and drop that in the offering plate, or I know some churches have an offering box or something like that on the way out, but just encourage people to have an immediate way to respond. And we've found that this is a great way to kind of get to the masses of the people, and they can have an immediate response to a call to be a part of a small group. What's your experience with this particular method, Alan?
Well, I have to be honest. I don't like all of those cards, but it's not about me, right? So it's a good way to get everybody. I mean, and you could possibly do this over several Sundays, but everyone fills out a card. Everyone's placed in a group, some way, somehow. But this is a massive administrative task because you have to have staff members, you have to have volunteers to help you sort these cards according to where and when people could possibly meet in groups. The other thing is it's based on some weak links in that if the connection between people is that they live in the same zip code, or the connection is that they will all meet on a Tuesday night, and there's nothing there relationally, then it's a little harder for that group to continue unless people are really, really committed to join groups. And what I found is these groups tend not to last. In fact, there are a lot of people that will sign up on a card and they'll turn it in, and then in the moment they thought they should sign up because everybody was signing up, but then when it comes down to it, they don't ever show up to the group, or the leader doesn't contact them, or whatever. So while on the one hand you can catch everybody, on the other hand, I've seen the results to be a little bit weak. Now that doesn't mean don't ever use a sign-up card, but maybe not use a sign-up card as your principal strategy for getting people connected into groups.
Yeah, and I want to underscore this massive administrative task because when we do small group campaigns, and even if you had 20 people fill out one of those cards, the challenge of trying to plug in and find a group, and you give people a call and you say, hey, I've got all these different groups. They meet at different times of the week. And then you start to have to do scheduling for people, and it just becomes a real challenge administratively to do that when you have 20, 30, or even more people that, for a large church, you could have hundreds of those cards, and having to have those phone conversations and email interactions is a big challenge, and it does get challenging and frustrating. Teresa, one of the points that Alan makes on this one is groups tend not to last. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that with respect to these kind of methods of incorporating people into small groups.
Well, absolutely. With the more massive sign-up where people are just kind of lumped into groups, just depending on something that's very common, day of the week, zip code, like Alan said. There's a period of time where you realize that certain people are just not the right fit. So for that reason, that's kind of one of the disadvantages. What we typically do is set aside a couple of weeks in the beginning to sort of get to know each other, hash out is this a good fit or not a good fit, and then redirect. Maybe there's 2 or 3 people, like for example, a group of women in their 50s, and then you've got someone in their maybe 25 that is not a great fit. We just then at that point, it's their option, but what we would do is direct them. So there's still, even once the group comes together, there's still some placing and navigating to assure that the group is, can be coherent and survive, hopefully.
That's right. And that, again, that gets back to that administrative task, is that you don't always know, you know, what the dynamics in a particular group are. So it's kind of hard to get that nailed down. And when you're just plugging people in randomly, it can be a real challenge and it not work. So what's the next method, Alan?
The next would be to find a group on the website. And so in this way, instead of people sign up for a group with their preferences, now they're going to the website and they're seeing what groups are actually available, what parts of town the groups meet in, when they meet, who the leaders are, that sort of thing. And so you have a wide variety of choices, and depending on how your website is set up, you could actually put in search criteria according to you know, the age of the people in the group, whether childcare is available, a wide variety of things to try to come up with a group. And so, again, this is different than the card, because the card you're kind of going into this blind, not knowing whose group you're going to end up in. This way you have at least a listing to start with.
Right, and it does take a little technological know-how to have a website that has a small group finder on it. That is sometimes a barrier for churches to get that lined up and to find the right product to do that. A lot of church database software systems now do offer modules that can embed within websites to help people. I know our particular church software has that, and we were able to embed that kind of search function and put criteria of what day of the week the group meets and who the leader is. And the nice thing it makes it possible for a member to go, oh, I know Teresa, I'd like to be a part of Teresa's group. And they can see, oh, she meets on Tuesday night. Well, that doesn't work for me. Let me go find another one. So it does put more control in the hands of the participant looking for a group. But again, it does put a lot of onus on the group participant to actually go onto the website and to sign up themselves, and that actually is just puts a technological challenge and a technological barrier in front of people, which can be challenging too. What's the next method?
One of the things I would say on this one, Charlie, is that once upon a time, our family was part of a very large church in Southern California, and I filled out the communication card on the weekend saying I would be interested in being part of a small group, because when you consult churches on small groups, it's kind of good that you're in one, because otherwise you're kind of a hypocrite. So I filled out my card. They sent me a letter in the mail, and the letter in the mail said that I should go onto the website and pick out a group. And so I went and I saw this listing, and I thought, you know, it's going to be a lot to get my family to a group, and do they have child care, and what's the situation? Maybe I should go, you know, on my own. And then as I began to look through, it's like I was new to town. I didn't know any of these people. So I thought, well, how do I even know what group, you know, to visit, let alone what group we should become a part of? And so I'm looking through all of these names, and they're all in the same town that I lived in. And I'm like, I have no clue. And finally I came upon one name, and the leader had his picture on there. So I clicked to look at his picture, and I opened up the picture, and I thought, I'm definitely not going to that group. And so it was very, very challenging to try to figure it out. So if you have some familiarity with people in the church, and the names are recognizable, and there are people that would be well known, that's one thing. But if you're new to the church, it is a bit of a needle in the haystack. And from the pastoral side, that if they're reaching out to a small group leader, how well is that small group leader following up with that prospective member would be the other piece. All right, so the next method would be
one of our participants put a comment here that says, we use our website to direct people back to the church for growth group signups. That way the participant has contact from somebody from the church, and hopefully someone from the group that they want to join.
I like that.
Yeah. Teresa, do you have people sign up for your groups through a website, and how do you follow up with them?
Right. So it is a combination of a couple of different things. Which one is our group link, which is the big meeting. But then we also have people that come through the website, and the church will assign them to me, and then I get a notification, and I, as a leader, will always reach out within 24 hours. Just to have a welcome email, let them know the date and time, just in case they were not aware of it. But on the website, my group is always posted as well, date, time, and meeting place. So we make it, only because I've been coached this way, we make it a priority to reach out, to embrace, and to just, show some love to these people and love on them, because that's what we want to do. We want to create community for them. So that it's just how we're coached. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's nothing worse than somebody who signs up for something and takes the risk, like Alan describing as a new member, to sign up for something and then nobody follows up with you. So I think it is so critically important, if you're going to use a tool like the website, to have that coaching to your host to make sure that they are doing what Teresa does, and she does a great job.
Or even a little supervision of that inquiry going not only to the leader, but also going to a coach, going to the small group director or whomever, so that there's some accountability of Charlie signed up to be in your group. Have you had a chance to connect with Charlie? And if they say they haven't, well, why don't you try to do that in the next couple of days, and I'll check in with you on Friday and see what's going on. And we can, you can make some things happen that way, but it is a little more work internally to supervise it. But I think we're one step closer. The next method is either to have a next step area or an information desk at the church. And this would be a place that's centralized, where after the service or before a service, people could go up to the desk, they could get information about a group, and maybe they can they can get a little bit of guidance. They have a person to talk to. So they're not necessarily putting information on a card, but they're saying, here's my situation, this is where I am in life, and maybe the person at the desk is knowledgeable, and they could say, oh, well, I know a great group that you should try, and let me have a leader contact you, or here's the leader's contact information, or however.
Great. And Alan, it looks like we lost your video, but we still hear you, so that's good. Next, so one of the things that we often do is do what we call a ministry table outside, and this does provide a outside the sanctuary. When people are leaving church, they can go out and they can talk to somebody, a live person, to interact with and help them navigate into a good group. And one of the things that we do, we had 40 small groups going for our last campaign. And so we would have sheets out there of groups that had spots and openings for their groups. And that staff person would be at the table and help people that are new or interested in the groups. Hey, here's a group that might work for you, and be able to have that interpersonal touch and discussion and negotiation. And that centralized information desk at the church, and having that same information at the receptionist desk during the week in the church office, we have found that this has been a very important touch and a place for people to sign up and get connected with groups. What's your experience, Teresa, with something like this?
Well, we do have sort of the help desk, same thing, sort of information. In our church, we spend a lot of time preparing for that connection event. So this step is more about building the excitement about getting into a group. It's not, for us, it's not necessarily saying, hey, I know of a great group and that you might fit in with. The information desk is more there to just promote the idea of small groups and to pass out information about the next event when we're all going to be connecting. So I don't know if that helps, because it's handled a little bit different, but it really is more about, our information centers are more about promotion and just providing general information.
Right. Yeah, and with a lot of churches that are smaller congregations, they don't necessarily have a church staff that's working Sunday morning. other than the pastor, is what Michael points out. And that's true. Even in our congregation, most of the greeter tables and the greeter functions and ushers and all of that are just volunteer positions that lay people can get engaged in the ministry. And when you're if you're building towards a church-wide program or church-wide campaign, and you have people involved in these kind of roles of staffing an information table, it gives somebody a place to use their gifts and to get engaged and interact with members of the church, and they're, you know, that's a great way of welcoming people, and especially providing that welcoming touch to people who are new or don't naturally find their way into a group. Some people are extroverted and they make their way into a small group quite easy, and others are more introverted. And having a safe person with an Ask Me button or a greeter button or something like that provides a safe place to go and explore something. Alan, you want to?
In the two churches that I've been on staff at, as well as the church I currently attend, they're all large churches. The first church I was at, it started at 85 and grew to be 800 adults on a weekend. The church I served here in Greenville was a church of 6,500. The church I currently attend is a church of about 40,000 on 19 campuses. And sometimes there gets to be this excuse of, there are so many people to place into groups. There are so many people. I can't possibly have all of these conversations. So we need to have, you know, a systematic solution to this, a programmatic solution, because a personal response would just be, you know, out of the question. And I tend to disagree with that, because, you know, even in the church I serve here in Greenville, you know, I couldn't be personal with 6,000 people, but I could be personal with the person in front of me. And so if somebody comes up to a desk and they have a question, I can spend a little time with them. I probably can't repeat that 6,000 times, but at least I can be, you know, I can give them my time and attention in that setting. I mean, in a perfect world, they would all go on to a website and they would find the perfect group and they would live happily ever after. And yet, I think what you're going to find now in the progression of methods is we're going from things that are more task-oriented, if you will, to things that are more relational-oriented. Because if you think about groups, I'm preaching now, Charlie, watch out. But if you think about groups, groups are a highly relational experience. And so I want to see us go beyond, you know, looking at this as a task to overcome, and to think about, you know, what would be the best way for these groups to fit together. And there's some sociological implications to that really have a lot of bearing on whether or not the groups will work well and whether or not the groups will continue. And I tell you what, it's one thing to place people into groups because you have a bunch of sign-up cards, but to do that every year or twice a year, forget it. I want groups to get together, to stick together, and to continue, so I don't have to put them in another group, you know.
That's right. So now we're getting to more personal ways of connecting members to small groups. And the connection event or small group fair is one of those ways. But before we get into this, I want to just see if there is any questions from people that do have their microphones on. I've unmuted the master mute now, and if you have some questions, just go ahead and ask.
I typed it in, but are the slides going to be available to the participants post-webinar?
Yes, we're going to record this event, and so we'll make that link available to you, and I can also send you an email of the PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, other questions? Okay. Well, if you have a question, go ahead and ask as we're going along. And I think we've got a pretty good line connection here with leaving you on unmuted. I might have to mute you back if we start to hear dogs barking and that sort of thing. So a connection event or a small group fair. Now this is a little bit more involved, and one of the principles that I've often had in my own church is what's easiest for the church staff or easiest for the pastor is not always the most effective. And as we've gone through the list here, You know, it's a pretty simple thing to put a card in the bulletin. But putting on a connection event is a lot bigger deal. But some of the benefits of it really outweigh the idea of just putting a card in the bulletin. And so how would you describe a connection event, Teresa? This is something that y'all do at your church.
So what we do, we will have tables set up with established group leaders like myself. And prior to, of course, the event, there's a lot of promotion around it in terms of just on Sunday for what seems months, but I'm sure it's just weeks, we're talking about it. So people are aware of the date and time. They do come in and they have a chance to talk with the group leaders at each table. And as a group leader, it's kind of my position that I want to be able to talk independently with each person for a few minutes, just to get a feel for really as a group, would they be a good fit? And I know that sounds kind of strange, but again, like what about I'm sorry.
We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. I think Charlie muted me. But anyway, just to be able to work with different, individual people and talk with them, meet with them, and then just as we go through the evening, maybe I think we meet for about an hour and a half, just to determine, hey, we've got 6 or 7 people here, and we talk about what is it that you're wanting to get out of this group. And again, of course, the logistics are important, but just to get an idea of are we a good fit for each other? And we leave that meeting or that connection event with the intention of meeting together. And the first meeting typically is more of a social event, just to carry it a little bit further. And then we'll jump into actual small groups, once a week.
And so some of the real risk in a connection event is actually the small group host is putting themselves out there at a table, and it's kind of like when you're, I've seen this happen at potlucks a lot of times where somebody will go and sit at a table all by themselves, and it's like, I dare anybody to come and be my friend and sit at this table with me. And sadly, sometimes I've watched one person sitting by themselves at a table and nobody ever comes and joins them at that table. And that's one of the saddest things to have happen to you, and it's really painful when that happens. And I think that's the big risk of a connection event, is actually what could happen to a host that doesn't make some connections.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a possibility. But what I try, because that's happened to me. I mean, I'm just saying. But what I try to do is remember how, and I've heard many people tell me this, how nervous it is, how nerve-wracking it is for people actually to come up to me. So if I'm sitting there, then I'm not seeing a lot of people come around me, I will actually go out to them because they're nervous. I don't know, because I'm kind of an extrovert, but they're very nervous about even making that initial, like walking into the room. So yeah, so it can happen. That's when you just have to get off your chair and just start fishing. So.
One of the things we've done is to actually make it a little bit of a party and have each of the groups bring a little bit of food. So they come up to the table because they're going to sample the food. And so now they have an excuse to come up, to approach the table because they want the food. And then while they're there, you can talk to them a little bit about what's going on with the group. The other thing with this, too, is if this is the sole method that someone's thinking about getting everybody connected into the group, it may work for some, it may not work for others. And so, I always encourage every single person that's going to host or lead a group to go ahead and invite a few people that they know, do a little inviting beforehand, and then come to this event, have a few more people signed up. We would actually have a roster sitting at the table where people could sign their names. And what we discovered was that if the host had a few people they had already invited and wrote those names on the roster, they had a tendency to get more people connected in their groups than the people who had a blank roster. Because if there were no names on the roster, the assumption was there's something wrong with that group because nobody wants to join it. And so I would say think of a few people, invite them, write their names on the list. Don't write Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck because people are wise to that. And then, of course, the opposite problems also happened where people lost control of their list. And I had one guy come to us. He was actually an elder in our church. And he said, I've got 40 people that signed up for my group. That's not even possible in my house. Where are they going to park in my neighborhood? I said, yeah, and who put his list down? So and the truth is half of them didn't show up, but that's another story.
Well, and the other thing about these kind of connection events, and I've heard this many times from churches that do this, is it's really a lot of fun. It's a great way, like particularly if you're going to do a small group campaign that involves everybody in the church. This is a way to get a lot of excitement and energy going before you launch your campaign. And so when you have, say you had 10 groups for your church, or if, I know we have some churches that are really large on here, but you had 30 or 300 groups or 500 groups, and you have your biggest parish hall has those tables set up. Think about all the energy and excitement as everybody's going around trying to find a group that fits them. And so this is a great way to build momentum and enthusiasm and excitement for what you're about to launch in your small group.
What we do at our group link, or what we have done, which is kind of fun along that same line of just making it an event and very fun, is we'll have, once the groups are kind of established for that night, we'll get together and have a contest where you name your group. And it's funny how creative we can get in terms of team names or group names, and then we'll vote on it, and then that group will get a $50 gift certificate to their first. They can use it for their first social or buy materials or whatever for the group. So it's kind of fun, something to think about.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the more creativity that you can bring into things like this, the better. And it's a great way for people to use their gifts and talents and to really show the breadth and the diversity of the body of Christ. So let's think about this last method, is the personal invitation. And actually, this will be the last two methods, but the idea of a personal invitation, what is this, Alan?
Yeah, I really think this is probably the second best way to get into a group, in that the person who's hosting the group thinks about people who are already in their lives that would enjoy or benefit from the study. And they know when they approach their friends, their family, their coworkers, their neighbors, they tell them that this is a Bible study. We're not doing bait and switch on them or anything like that. But you want to think about existing relationships. And so maybe it's even, my pastor on a Sunday morning, our pastor in California, on the Sunday morning, he said, I want everybody to get out their cell phone. And he said, I want you to turn it on. And I thought, he has lost his mind. And so he said, I want you to turn on your phone, and I want you to look at your speed dial on your phone. And who are the last 10 people that you called? Would you call them and invite them to be part of your group? Now, we didn't call them in the service, and then he told them to turn their phones off and put them away. But to think about, we're already connected to people. If you're brand new to the church, if you're brand new to a community, that's an exception. That's where you may need the information desk or the sign-up card or the website or the connection event to help you get into a group. But most people that have been in a community for a while, you have people that you know, and you can just invite those people to come and be a part of your group.
That's correct. And this is actually my favorite way to encourage people to build small groups, because I believe that everybody already has a small group of people in their life that they would like to do life together with. And part of the reason why this is so exciting to me is because I have an evangelist's heart. And I know that when people start to really begin to think about and pray about people in their lives that are already established relationships, some of those people are going to be coworkers, friends, neighbors, spouses, and a small group can provide a way for those people to get connected to the Christian faith in a way that is personal and meaningful and intimate. And relationship evangelism has always been the best way of leading people to the Lord. I think a very few people become Christians because they get argued into the faith. more often than not, it's one friend telling another friend about the Lord. And so I love the personal invitation, and I personally think this is one of, I know it says the second best way to get into a group. Why don't we move on to let me show you the next slide here. We do a thing in our church called a host rally. And this is a way of encouraging personal invitation to all of our hosts. So rather than having a connection event that is open to the entire church, we do a special night that is just for the small group hosts. And it's a night of prayer and worship and encouragement of each other. I do a little bit of vision casting. So when we launched our Crucified Life series this last Lent, we backed up a few weeks before we launched, so in January, and we encouraged all of the hosts to come out for a special night. And we had a prayer charge where the person that was in charge of our prayer ministry stood up and really offered some wonderful scriptures and prayers. And then I asked them to do the little exercise called the 5-circle exercise. And if you think about it, there's friends, the firm is your work, fun, people that you do social things with, people at your gym, or you might do a hobby, fellowship, and family. And so we all have people in these different spheres of our lives, or different circles of our lives. And in a sense, this is what the presentation is. We all have people in these different spheres, different circles. I want to ask you to think about who those people are, and maybe write down a few names as the Lord leads you to those people. And if you give people some space in the context of that host rally to write down those names, they can begin to generate a list of people that the Lord may put on their heart to ask. And if you involve prayer in this and the work of the Holy Spirit and those providential connections, the next thing you know, we're asking people that we never would have captured through some of these other methods that we have talked about, sign-up sheets at church or a website. These are people that are going to be personally invited by members of your church to be part of their small group. Teresa, do you have experience with this particular method of bringing people into your groups, personal invitation?
Yes and no, not on a large scale, but I love this. And I've actually, with the long-term group, which we're at 2.5 years right now, this is how I want to grow this group, because over the last 2.5 years, we have lost a few members, some people have relocated, moved out of the state, etc. And this, I love it. So can I borrow this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to steal this, and I believe that those times when we have personally invited people, when they have come in, they have been very, very committed to the group, and usually we reach out and invite people in who we are already confident that they're going to bring a lot to the group. So it's just a great addition. But yeah, so to grow my existing group, I love this. Haven't used it a lot, but yeah.
On my street in my neighborhood, there are actually 4 St. Peter's small groups that meet through the week. And so when I walk down the street, I was walking down the street with my dog the other day, and I passed by some of my neighbors out walking, and they said, "Oh, hey, Father Charlie, we're really enjoying our small group," and they don't even go to our church, but they were invited by one of those church members that has one of the small groups on our street, and they have connected to that fellowship group, and it's primarily because they have that connection as neighbors, and this is the power of those personal relationships. And so now here I have these neighbors that have a spiritual connection to me now, because they are in a small group that is part of our church's small group, and they recognize me and acknowledge that as we were passing by. I got 3 notes about 3 weeks ago from wives whose husbands have really started to come back to the Lord because of their relationships that they've been fostering in their small groups. And these are men that really are not church-going men, but they're starting to come to the faith because being in their own home or being in a home is a lot safer to them than actually the large group gatherings at church on Sunday. And two of those men have actually started attending church, and one of them we're still praying about. But it just was very interesting to see that, you know, these are family members that have been invited by their spouses to be a part of their small group, and they showed up, and the Lord's beginning to use the relationships in the small group to lead them back to Himself. Well, before we break in, or we have, let me just stop, and I'm going to see if I can unmute all of our attendees again and see if there are any questions that are out there. So I think you're unmuted. Any questions? Not hearing any.
So I have a question, Charlie.
Okay, sure.
So I've heard you say before that your small group attendees or the small group participation exceeded your average Sunday attendance. Is this the tool that you used in order to make that happen? Is that the most obvious way of making that happen?
Well, this is one of the strategies that we use to accomplish that in our congregation. I think you know, we've done a series of webinars that I would encourage people to look at if they're interested in, and also in the Christian Life Trilogy trainings that I'm going to mention in just a few minutes. We talk about how we do that, but I think the key thing is planning ahead, building a leadership team, and recruiting your host before you recruit participants. That's the key recipe that we use that gets to a higher level of people in small groups. So if you recruit participants before you've recruited your hosts, everybody will want to be a participant in a small group and nobody will want to host a group. So if you back up from when you're launching your small group campaign, so like if you're going to launch a small group campaign in February, you actually want to start recruiting small group hosts in December, so that when you launch the open invitation to all the participants in January, you already have all your small group established, and those are all lined up, and you're ready to plug people into those groups. So it's important to plan ahead and make sure you're lining people up. Any thoughts that you have about that, Alan? That's a good question.
Yeah, and I think, you know, even in December, early January, to begin to try to do that. But yeah, this is a great strategy. You know, this book that I'm writing, the first line of the book is people are already in groups. And so the question is, can you challenge them within those groups to do something intentional about their spiritual growth? And so I've seen groups of friends that, you know, they regularly met at Starbucks and now they're doing a study at Starbucks, or they would meet in a break room at work. I had one group that met on a commuter train that went from Stockton, California to San Jose every day.
Wow.
So
now I see a hand from Georgette. Did you want to say something, Georgette?
I just wanted to know if it is important to build your base before you start making the groups, is what you're actually saying.
Yes. I think that's critically important, and you know, when you open up your time or period, you know, say several weeks before you're launching your small groups,
yes.
You want to make sure that you've already done some work in recruiting hosts. That's not to say that you won't get more hosts that time before the groups start. You will. But you want to get as many as you can, at least 3 or 4 weeks before you launch your small groups.
And you have to make them familiar enough with what is about to happen.
Correct. I often want to do my host rally a month, 3 weeks to a month before we do that, so that the hosts are educated and know what the small group series is about, they have some sense of the overview of it and some of the strategy of the way the curriculum works. So I used that host rally to do a little host training as well as inspiring and encouraging. Great questions.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Not
Okay.
right now.
Great. Thank you, Georgette.
Well, thank you.
Charlie, we can't hear you.
We lost you, Charlie.
Myself.
There you go.
All right.
There,
So
now.
before we get to the best way to recruit small groups, I do want to give a little commercial for the Christian Life Trilogy program. Can you get to that slide, Alan?
Yeah. See where it is. There it is.
There it is. One of the things that we've done, and this is a great time of year to be thinking about this and doing some of that foundational work, but we've created a small group curriculum, and Alan was part of the programming of this, that is designed for Lent, Easter season, and sometime after Pentecost. And it's actually about a year's worth of small group curriculum. And it starts with the crucified life. And that's a 7-week study that leads up to Easter Day. And it leads people in the way of the cross of Jesus Christ. And it tracks with the 7 last words of Jesus. And then the follow-up small group study is looking at what does it mean to walk in the newness of life that Jesus has called us to in the resurrected life. I think a lot of us understand what it means to die and to repent, but sometimes we struggle with the idea of what does it mean to walk in the life that Jesus has called us to. But you have to go through the process of crucified life to get to resurrected life. And then the last of the series is the Spirit-filled life and exploring what does it mean to be filled with the Holy Spirit and what are some of the things that the Holy Spirit is doing in our day and age to renew and reach this world for the Lord. So now I'd love to have you take a look at this, and there's a website called ChristianLifeTrilogy.com, and we're offering this. You can get the whole set of materials along with training materials for this particular campaign that goes into some of the things we've been even talking about today, and that's for $99. And you can get to that from the website ChristianLifeTrilogy.com. So the last thing we want to go back to is what is the best way to, if we could pick any of these, what's the best assimilation strategy for getting people into small groups? What would you say, Alan?
Well, I think I've got it up on the screen here. Whichever one's most effective for you, that would be the best one. But I honestly think the best way to get into a group is if you host a group. If you're the host, if you're the leader, you're in the group. And so that's the best way to get into a group is just to do your own.
Yeah. Teresa, out of all those assimilation strategies, what have you found is the best?
I have to say to Alan, you can do your own or 3. If you
That's true.
I personally do like the group event, like the host rally, and I like the connection events because it brings people together under one roof, and we're all there for the same reasons, to connect. I also like the having the information desk, having around that time when the group's about to start, having somebody there representing, whether it's a staff member or a volunteer or a host, a group leader that just can speak to the experience and the why behind joining a group or leading a group. So I like both of those strategies: the linking, the actual event for connecting, and then the information table, or just right there, out in front or in the back, wherever it stands.
Yeah, someone was even asking me yesterday about whether they should print a small group directory, which the hard thing with that is as soon as one group changes anything, it's outdated. But should they print a directory or should they use a website? And I think a lot of times those are good tools to use at an event where people are meeting, because they'll look at a map, they'll look at a listing, and they'll say, well, you know, this Bob Smith, that seems like it'd be the right group. And so, well, let me take you over and introduce you to Bob. And so you make that personal connection, but they had to process it maybe a little different way. But the one thing that I will underscore is to say, I wouldn't count on any one of these, because you could have the thing where they go and they meet the leaders, they sign up, but still put it on the leader to invite some people ahead of time. And then have a place for, okay, I'm new to the church, I'm new to the area, I don't know a soul, I want to get to know some people that are part of this church. Make an opportunity. And so whether they do a sign-up card or whether they go to the website or what have you, make some kind of an opportunity. Now, that's not going to be the rule. If you're doing a lot of these other strategies, then most people are going to be placed in a group by their own selection. But you want to let the exceptions be the exceptions. So if you have people that, okay, that's not going to be a good workable solution to walk into a group of strangers and I don't know where to go, you know, place them in a group. Find somebody that you know, you trust, and say, I think you're going to have a good experience in Teresa's group, so we're going to send you over there. And if you have an opportunity to introduce them ahead of time, then go ahead and introduce them. But I think it really is, people come to us in different ways. They're busy. They maybe don't have time to look at the website. Maybe they don't have the ability to look at a website. Maybe all of these things confuse them. And so I would say as many of these things as you need to try to get your people connected, that's what I would do. And you can do them in waves. You don't have to do them all at once. But the main thing is to help people find a good place where they can get to know other believers, be encouraged, and learn how to apply God's Word to their life.
Yep. And what I would say at our church is we've actually never done the connection event. So that's the one out of this list that we haven't ever done at St. Peter's. But we do all the other ones. So whenever we do a small group program or campaign, we use the host rally, but we also have sign-up cards in the bulletin. We have announcements that are made. We have an information desk outside. We have a way for people to get connected on our website. So we do all of the above. I think sometimes you do have to choose between the host strategy, the host rally, or the connection event, because it's hard to get all of your hosts together for two things. You usually can only get them together for one. But, you know, I am the kind of philosophy that I don't want to lose anybody. I want to give so many different opportunities for people to get connected to our church that I want to make all of these ways accessible and available, because I do know that people are different personalities and different needs. So let me just, are there any other questions that anybody would like to share or ask while we're still on the call? We've got a few more minutes before 3 o'clock.
Yeah, Charlie, it's John McLaurin again.
Hi.
So I was doing a little analysis of our in-house stuff, and about 46% of our average attendance is in some kind of small group or another.
Great.
Not particularly well organized from my perspective, but nonetheless they're active and they're passionate and dedicated to it. So if we were to launch your program, the Crucified Christ program, I'm struggling with a little bit, as I don't want to have any mitigating factor on the established groups, right? I don't want to pull away from them. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. If we were to launch your program that we looked at SALT and push it out, how do you navigate that kind of transition?
Well, a couple of ideas I'll just throw out to you, and I'm not telling you this is the answer, but these are things that have worked for us. One is I've cast a vision as the senior pastor to say, hey, we're going to do something together, and we have a big goal. We want to get, we currently have, a lot of people in small groups, but we want to get 100% of our average attendance. So we need to have, in our case, 40 households step up to be hosts of small groups, and I'll throw the number out to the church, and so that right there just kind of already says to the church, hey, we're doing something big, and we want to do it together, and it's going to be all hands on deck hosting small groups. And so one thing that I'll often say if it's going to be a short-term campaign is to say, you may want to consider, if you're part of a small group, you know how to do small groups, you're an expert at it, you know what it means to be a host of a small group. Maybe take a vacation from your group. It's not to say you can't go back to it, but just take a vacation for this particular 7-week thing and do it that way. Or maybe your group could talk about breaking into 2 or 3 small groups and reaching out and multiplying. And so you encourage people to go in pairs or in groups of 3 and then go and find a few more people to fill in those groups. But you can ask people as the senior pastor to do something for the church evangelistically. We have had people in our church, though, even when I do it as nice as I can, asking them to take a small group vacation or something like that, they will insist that their group is not going to break up. And I don't pressure those groups or persecute them. I had one lady tell me that I was banning her Bible study from church. And I thought to myself, you know, if I got the reputation of being the pastor that banned Bible study, I could start underground Bible studies everywhere because the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And so the idea that I'm persecuting Bible studies kind of has an appealing ring.
That's funny. You know, one of the things I would say, John, I live in a state that doesn't have a helmet law, so we tend not to make anything mandatory. And so with the established groups, you know, as Charlie was saying, to cast vision and try to, you know, get as many people on board as possible. But I think to make it an option, because if you have groups that they have a set plan, they have a dedicated thing that they do, you know, I always say, as long as they're not, you know, talking bad about the pastor, worshiping the devil, then we'll just leave them alone. And there are those folks, and for whatever reason, as soon as you suggest that you're going to place a requirement on them, they will dig in and put up a fight. And I think that if you could say, you know, if your groups would be interested, we'd love to have you be a part of this. But if not, we understand. You'll get a lot more people saying yes that way than saying all of our groups are going to do the study, no exceptions. Then you're going to have some disagreement in there. And also, I will say on the last strategy, when Charlie said that they have not had a connection event at his church, we'll give you a break on that, Charlie, because you know, you're the only one on the call here that's actually had 3 times as many people in groups as you've had in worship. So I'll give you a break on that one.
Thank you.
Thanks for the input. I don't want to take up any more of the time. I know you only have a few minutes.
No, you're good.
Well, I do want to say one more thing about that, John, and that is that I always think it's important to identify the opinion leaders of the congregation, people who are like the E.F. Hutton types, that if they talk, people listen. And we all know who those people are in our church. And invite them to be part of the leadership team. And even maybe make them the ones that are recruiting those small group hosts. Because if they say this is a good thing and this is what we're going to do as a congregation, the rest of the congregation will follow. And while you do have an absolutely critical role as the senior pastor, those opinion leaders in your congregation are equally as important, and honoring them by inviting them to be on board with it is a great way to get the rest of your congregation engaged.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Other questions or thoughts?
I would just say, as a small group leader in that particular scenario that John was talking about, you know, even though it's a volunteer position, I do look to our senior pastor, and I look to people, you know, that I work with on a daily basis. So I know a couple of times a year we're going to be looking at a particular campaign. So as I'm leading my group, I just know certain times of the year we're going to be talking about a certain study or certain concept, whatever. And it does come from the senior pastor, most respectfully. So.
Another way to think about it, too, is that if you already have 45% of your church engaged in small groups, if you can find small group hosts to capture the other half of the church, and so inviting people that aren't part of those small groups to be hosts, you actually can then connect. And I think it's very hard to connect a lot of times to an established group. If there's a people that have been meeting for 10 years together and they have these relationships, it's very difficult a lot of times for a new person, unless it's a real special thing, to come into that group and engage with those people because they have so much life context with each other. So a new group is really so good to have spawning and happening, always creating new groups, because it really does make it possible for the new people and for people that aren't engaged yet to get connected. And I also think again, the evangelistic heart that I have, it's so important for people to understand the vision of the kingdom and casting that vision that we're here to multiply and to make disciples of all. So casting that vision is so important for evangelistic and event. And maybe they might have an established group, but they could be like Teresa and have 3 groups going. So Teresa's got an evangelist's heart and a disciple maker's heart. Okay, well, it's past 3 o'clock, so I don't want to take all your time, but I'm so glad for all of you to be on the call, and I do hope you'll take a look at the Christian Life Trilogy as a possible program for your church. And again, ChristianLifeTrilogy.com is the website. And thank you so much. And I do, let me just close with a prayer. Father, thank you so much for these participants. Do pray as they're thinking about recruiting people into the life of their church, into small groups, that you would bless them and bear abundant fruit from the ministries represented by the people on this call. We bless you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Hi, my name's Charlie Holt, and I'm the pastor of St. Peter's Church and the author of the Christian Life Trilogy. Over the years, I've had a hunger to see solid small group materials developed in and around the core faith of our church, found in the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that He was buried, and that He was raised on the 3rd day in accordance with the Scriptures." The Christian Life Trilogy seeks to focus on the things of first importance: the crucified life, the resurrected life, and the Spirit-filled life. To explore what it means to walk the way of the cross, to be raised with Christ in newness of life, and to be filled with all the fullness of the Spirit of God. As a pastor, every year I'm asking myself, what am I going to do for Lent this year? Listen to the impact the Crucified Life materials have had on those who participated during Lent.
I think very often you look at the empty cross, you look at just the season of Lent, here we go, another year. This gave people an opportunity to go deeper and to really find out, what does this mean? How does this apply to my life? What does this mean for my depth of spirituality?
To think of what Jesus was going through, it just made the Easter experience, the entire Easter experience, the most profound one I've ever had.
The average Christian, when he thinks about the last 7 phrases that Christ said on the cross, may take them at face value. But when we find out from this session on the crucified life, the meaning behind those words and how it applies to us, it definitely matures you as a Christian in a very strong way. I look at things totally different than I did before.
I think the crucified life really went to a place in people's lives where they're longing, but maybe don't even know they need. I've heard over and over again how God's touched people's lives and brought them to a deeper level of faith and intimacy with Christ through this Crucified Life series, and how our church as a community went through it together.
What you have just heard is the transformational power of the first study in the trilogy, The Crucified Life, 7 Words from the Cross. The entire Christian Life Trilogy is a 20-week journey into the heart of the gospel and the heart of the Christian life. These 3 studies are not only deeply theological in their intent and purpose, but also deeply practical as they call us to be transformed into the image and likeness of God through His Son, Jesus Christ.
Within just a couple of weeks, people were really sharing some of their biggest challenges, some of the toughest things that they're going through, and then I'm watching other people in my group literally just wrap their arms around them, pray for them, and get involved in their lives. And that stuck and still sticks to this day. So that was, I think, what we needed, and that's what God did through the material.
God is calling the church back to His heart, and you're invited to be a part of that by participating in the Christian Life Trilogy church-wide campaign. I hope this resource will bring tremendous renewal to the church, your congregation, and to you personally. My prayer is that the Lord will bring all of our hearts back to the things of first importance as we walk the way of the crucified life, the resurrected life, and the Spirit-filled life.